Welcome to This Week in Aviation, brought to you by AviatorDB. I'm Mark Preston. Coming up, the FAA mandates new door plug inspections for 737 MAX production while keeping Boeing's monthly cap at 38 aircraft. A Paris court convicts Air France and Airbus of manslaughter in the Flight 447 crash, and the NTSB pulls its public docket system offline after AI tools reconstruct protected cockpit audio. We begin with the FAA's latest move to tighten oversight of Boeing's 737 MAX production line. The agency announced May 27th that it's imposing enhanced mid-cabin door plug inspections on all new 737 MAX before they can receive airworthiness certificates. That includes detailed visual verification that all 4 critical bolts are installed on each door plug. The inspection protocol alternates weekly between FAA inspectors and Boeing engineers, a level of embedded oversight that extends the agency's direct involvement into day-to-day production operations. These measures are a direct response to the Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 door plug blowout. The FAA is also maintaining Boeing's production cap at 38 aircraft per month, saying it will only consider lifting that restriction once the company demonstrates sustained quality improvements. For airlines like Southwest, which operates an all 737 fleet and has 269 MAX 7s still awaiting certification, these constraints are reshaping capacity planning. The carrier is now leaning heavily on MAX 8 deliveries for growth. The alternating inspection authority raises questions about accountability. If a quality issue slips through, who bears responsibility when oversight shifts between federal inspectors and company engineers every 7 days? For passengers and crews, this represents the FAA taking unprecedented direct control over Boeing's assembly line, a fundamental shift from the delegated certification model that has defined the relationship between regulators and manufacturers for decades, now to a collision between aviation safety and artificial intelligence. The NTSB has taken its entire public docket system offline after discovering that AI tools can reconstruct protected cockpit voice recordings. The issue emerged following the agency's May 19th and 20th public hearings on the fatal UPS Flight 2976 MD-11 crash. That investigation revealed at least 10 prior spherical bearing fractures in MD-11 engine pylons, yet only 4 were formally reported to the FAA. After posting hearing documents online, the NTSB included spectrogram images from the cockpit voice recorder. Outside parties then used AI tools to process those spectrograms and approximate the actual cockpit conversations, something federal law explicitly prohibits. The agency responded by temporarily shutting down public access to its entire docket system. They've since restored most access, but they're actively reviewing and removing spectrum analysis content from accident case files. This raises a big question about transparency versus privacy. Investigators rely on sharing technical data for safety learning, but if AI can reverse engineer protected audio from images, the whole framework of what can be released needs rethinking. The timing is particularly significant given the high-profile nature of the UPS case, where 2 decades of underreported pylon failures are under scrutiny. Independent analysis of such cases depends on access to technical artifacts. If those disappear from public view, it could weaken external oversight of safety investigations. Turning to France, where a Paris appeals court has overturned earlier acquittals and convicted both Air France and Airbus of involuntary manslaughter in the 2009 crash of Flight 447. The court imposed the maximum fines available under French law at the time, €225,000 or about $261,000 on each company. All 228 people aboard the A330 died when the aircraft crashed into the Atlantic Ocean. This reverses a prior acquittal and marks a major legal victory for families who have sought corporate accountability for more than a decade. The convictions formally establish criminal corporate liability in one of aviation's most studied disasters. The Flight 447 accident previously drove industry-wide changes, including mandatory pitot tube upgrades and more robust stall recovery training. But this criminal conviction goes beyond technical fixes to assign legal culpability to the airline and manufacturer. The relatively small fine matters less than the precedent. This ruling could encourage prosecutors in other jurisdictions to pursue criminal cases against manufacturers and operators when design, training, or risk communication issues contribute to accidents. For the industry, this shows that cooperation cooperation with accident investigations now carries potential criminal exposure, a development that could completely change how companies approach safety disclosures and technical transparency. We close this segment with two connected stories about runway safety, starting with new details on the Toronto Pearson CRJ-900 accident. The Transportation Safety Board's technical briefing reveals the Endeavour Air aircraft touched down with an approximately 1,110 feet per minute descent rate and about 7 degrees of bank angle. That impact fractured the right main gear side stay, leading to gear collapse and wing root structural damage. 21 passengers and crew were injured during the emergency evacuation. Investigators are examining both pilot training around unstable approaches and the certification basis for the landing gear design margins on the CRJ-900. This accident arrives just as the NTSB issued a new wet runway safety spotlight, warning that real-world wheel-braking friction on wet runways can be substantially lower than values assumed in FAA runway condition-based performance planning. The spotlight urges more accurate braking action reports and closer scrutiny of landing distance calculations in wet conditions. It aligns with recent guidance from Airbus and the NBAA that highlights the difference between wet and contaminated runway assumptions. Both the Toronto accident's extreme touchdown parameters and the NTSB's warning about optimistic braking assumptions point to the same issue. Crews may be operating with less margin than they believe they have, particularly as summer storm season brings more wet runway operations. For dispatchers and pilots, these developments suggest a need to recalibrate performance planning and perhaps accept more go-arounds when approach parameters drift outside stabilized criteria. What looks conservative on paper may be barely adequate in practice. Also in aviation news this week, Newark Liberty has been in the spotlight for a series of troubling incidents involving both aircraft operations and air traffic control communications. On May 3rd, United Flight 169, a 767-400ER from Venice, struck a light pole and a tractor trailer on final approach to runway 29 at Newark. The aircraft landed safely with all 231 people aboard uninjured, though the truck driver was hurt. The NTSB has seized the flight data and cockpit voice recorders for investigation. Newark has also generated multiple viral recordings of tense exchanges between controllers and pilots. In one April 22nd incident, a controller told United Flight 995's crew, "I know what I'm doing," after they questioned approach vectors. Another recording captured a controller sharply asking a Spirit pilot, "What are you doing right now?" after a taxiway deviation linked to phraseology confusion. The FAA's zero-tolerance policy on unruly passengers continues to shape how crews handle disruptive behavior. Since January 2021, the policy instructs crews to treat interference with safety duties or physical threats as grounds for immediate law enforcement involvement. That framework was tested again when a United flight from Newark to Guatemala City diverted to Washington Dulles after a passenger allegedly tried to open a cabin door at 36,000 feet and assaulted another traveler. While cabin doors cannot be opened at cruise altitude due to pressurization, the FBI is investigating and the flight was canceled. Two recent general aviation accidents highlight persistent risks in low-altitude operations. In Florida, an AT-6D Warbird crashed during a formation flight checkout near Bronson on April 13th, killing the pilot. The NTSB found the aircraft descended below 1,000 feet MSL before entering an unrecoverable spin. In Kazakhstan, on May 27th, an Antonov and 2R crop duster struck power lines near Zelezinka, killing one pilot and injuring another. Wire strikes remain a leading hazard in agricultural aviation, where low-level maneuvering around infrastructure is routine. The NTSB has determined that Apollo 8 astronaut William Anders died last June when he began a low-altitude aerobatic maneuver at about 1,800 feet over water. Investigators found the required pull-up radius at his entry speed would have resulted in water impact even with maximum recovery inputs. Anders was 90 years old and was not wearing a parachute or flotation device. In urban air mobility developments, Atlantic Aviation has begun retrofitting New York's East 34th Street heliport to support future Joby and Archer Electric vertical takeoff and landing operations. The upgrades include power and charging systems compatible with both CCS and GEACS standards, with completion tied to FAA certification milestones. And Europe's largest military air show has become a casualty of global security operations. Organizers have canceled the Royal International Air Tattoo 2026 after consultations revealed RAF Fairford would likely remain unavailable due to ongoing U.S. bomber deployments. Reports indicate up to 23 bombers have been based at Fairford during peak deployment periods. That's this week in aviation. For the latest aviation news, visit aviatordb.com. I'm Mark Preston. We'll see you next week.